So my name is David Losey. I am a solution architect with Slom Consulting, focusing on content and collaboration, specifically with SharePoint, Office 365. The fellow organizer, Mike Dixon, is a senior consultant with Wellington Street, and Dimitri A. is SharePoint competency lead for Cognizant. There are Twitter accounts. Feel free to follow us, chat with us. We are more than eager to have conversations with you, I promise. Last time, this is not the right slide. Hold on, let me make sure I have the right deck. Yes, okay. This is not the right slide for last time. Last time we had Oliver here talking about OneDrive for Business and some of the security and administration pieces around that. I had a lot of aha moments in that personally. I thought it was a fantastic session. That session video should be available soon. Dimitri's nodding, good. As we recorded that should be available soon on our website for your reference. And we like to spend a couple minutes to go through what's changed in Office 365 since last time we met. Microsoft is constantly pushing out updates and good news, so we're going to run through those now with Mike Dixon.
All right.
Do you want me to push buttons?
Yeah, sure. You can push.
Push.
So, so the first big thing that Microsoft pushed out was Staff Hub. Staff Hub is actually available. What is it? It's available today. Yes. So that's for everybody. I know I was playing with it. So what Staff Hub does is it basically gives you the ability to do scheduling. It's really kind of designed at kind of a retail sort of environment. Anybody that has employees that run in shifts. So it's very focused on doing shift coordination, things like that. The really nice thing about Staff Hub that I noticed is from a licensing standpoint, only the manager needs to be licensed. Other than that, anybody can be added over here with just a name and a phone number, and they can just create shifts. And then there's an app for the phones for everybody that tells them when their shifts are. They can see who else is working the same shifts. It also facilitates requesting time off and swapping of shifts with people. So really nice stuff with that.
Does this automatically come with 365 or?
I'm sorry?
Does it automatically come with 365?
Yes, with any of the bundled licenses. So E1, E3, and E5.
Cool. You guys up front were talking about this. Is this something of great interest? Nice. Awesome. If you roll it out successfully, feel free to come back and share your experience with this.
Yeah, let us know.
And maybe have your company sponsor. Just kidding.
So we were actually just talking about this. This is one unifying DLP. So data loss prevention is something that has existed in Office 365 in a couple of forms for quite a while. Its oldest iteration is actually in the Exchange world, and as they rolled it out to cover SharePoint and OneDrive, they, for some reason, decided to reinvent the entire interface, and they built the interfaces completely separately. They are now consolidating all of those, so you now have a single DLP policy that can cover all three platforms,
Nice.
which is a really, really nice welcome change. And also what's really nice that I put in there is that these changes do not. Yeah.
That's my question. Yeah.
That is, yeah, what? But again, it says sites. We
Right.
still don't know if that'll go down
Site
to
level.
folder level. I don't think that'll go down to folder level, but we'll see. And so these changes do not impact any of the previous policies that you had in place.
Where is that stored now? Is this saying if you have a SharePoint online site,
Yeah.
you have data loss protection?
Yeah.
Where's the protection?
The protection is actually just a configuration. So it's a configuration. It's actually a policy that resides in the administrative area of the tenant. So there's no actual data there other than just the configuration. And then you configure it so that if you were to hit next here, it would then ask you which, well, it wouldn't with this one, but if you selected specific sites, when you click next, it would then ask you what sites, and you would plug in the URLs for the sites.
How many of you are using DLP or have it activated? How many of you are interested in using it, and maybe a session on when to use DLP and how? Okay, awesome. Kind of like an intro 101 to DLP. Awesome, we can do that. Hey, government.
Government people got an update. So for those of you that don't know, the way that Microsoft has dealt with its government compliance is there are actually completely separate data centers for the government tenants, and the features are rolled out to them very differently. Yes. There are a bunch of new features that were just approved and rolled out into those government tenants. And those include the Skype for Business voice, the video and meeting services, advanced security workloads, and the data analytics tools. So those are now all approved and available in the government data centers. About that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So is this still multi-tenant for the government sector as well? Do you know?
Dimitri, do you know the answer to that?
It depends.
Yeah.
So there is a multi-tenant option, which is what most agencies would use, but there's also dedicated offerings within that as well.
They're trying to deprecate that, so.
Yeah.
They deprecated the old.
Did they deprecate the announcement that they're deprecating that?
So the original dedicated, now they have a new dedicated called
Next.
which is basically the multi-tenant fabric on dedicated hardware and storage.
Okay. The Windows Office 365 start page got a big new update. That update mostly includes a slightly different tile layout, but what's really big is recent documents are now displayed directly underneath, and those recent documents are an aggregate across multiple sites and OneDrives. So any OneDrive store that you have access to, so not just yours, but anyone that somebody has shared out of theirs with you. And also any SharePoint documents. And as we were talking about in the last session, there's a new OneDrive for Business Admin Center, which is very nice. This is basically a series of commands that were only available via PowerShell prior to this. So these commands have been around for a while. Some of these are new, but most of them have been around for a while, but now there's a graphical interface for them. This still has not been included into the regular admin tenant yet. So that's why I included that URL up there. That URL can be used until they roll it out for general availability.
It has to be enabled, correct? No.
This admin console does not have to be enabled separately, no.
Mike, is this for the high-level admin or this user phase?
This is tenant admins.
Okay.
Yeah, because all of these settings are global.
Right.
That's it.
Cool.
Thank you to our sponsor.
Yes. Thank you, Actians. Time.
Awesome. Well, my name is Todd Heythaler, and my colleague here, Don and Ryan. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to come out and talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing in the marketplace. You know, today's session really is around Office 365 and ensuring compliance. And, you know, Don and I both combined have been in this industry probably 40 years.
Yeah.
The data cells combined, but maybe 50. You're a little older than I am.
Come on, look better.
So we know this is primarily, you know, a technical IT crowd, so we can kind of switch back and forth. And, you know, obviously this is not an advertisement for our organization. What I thought we'd do is kind of walk you through what we see in the marketplace today, and I think there's a couple things, and I'd love to get your feedback on this as well as we go through this, because half of this is kind of an information exchange back and forth, what we see in the marketplace. I've supported, enterprise customers like Qualcomm when they had e-discovery challenges back in 2008, where they had to go out and do a discovery request. And really, honestly, the challenge they had at the time was they just didn't have a tool to go to everyone's desktop and collect the data at the time, right? They were using, some internal tools to go collect it, but trying to get a PST file off of Don's laptop when he's traveling on a plane makes it very difficult. So, in any case, so that's kind of where I've grown up in, typically in e-discovery litigation processes. And obviously, information governance has become a buzzword. I think what we're finding is, information governance, depending on the vertical market you're in, you could be in healthcare, you could be in pharmaceutical or life sciences, financial services, right? If organizations are looking at their data, and maybe legal has come to you, the IT organization, and said, great, we're rolling out Office 365, we're going to use Exchange Online. How do we retain our data based on this file plan? How do we implement, right? So what we help organizations with today is getting their arms around their data, but also with the explosiveness of unified communications, right? Specifically there where now you have voice and video, organizations are trying to do federation outside of the organization through, Skype for Business Online or Skype for Business On-Premise. It really creates a lot of challenges for organizations today. And I can talk to you about a number of organizations. One of them that we support and work with is MetLife, right? So they were really struggling with the user adoption because legal and compliance had put the brakes on, right? So at the time they rolled this out, they're moving from IBM Domino mail servers and same time chat. So they had an existing process in, and this was really painful for them, right? So they moved over to the Office 365 stack, one of the very first early adopters. And legal and compliance said, well, wait a second, if I can't monitor what Don's doing, I can't track what Don's doing, I can't archive what Don's doing, we got a problem with it, right? So they put the brakes on it and they started evaluating different tools and technologies. And a lot of organizations look at it from a backup, right? So Don does a backup, I've got a backup, it's sitting there, but they really want more contextual information, real-time information, and analytics around what's going on. So in any case, we're going to focus, kind of the market trends, what we're seeing, information governance, the changing landscapes, and I know we've got a number of different vertical markets here, probably from government to financial service, healthcare, but I think you'll see a lot of these things really apply. And then, drill into Office 365, what it offers, and what we see some of the limitations are, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. So market trends, what are we seeing? First of all is everyone's moving to the cloud, right? We're working with a Canadian bank right now who has, they're doing business in 30 different countries. Their biggest challenge right now is in-country record retention. How do they do it with the Microsoft Office 365 environment? So the organization is CIBC, so now we're working collectively with them to really develop this program for them. But the first thing is, looking at organizations and coming up with a crawl, walk, run approach, right? So this leads into a hybrid model where, if you're a financial services customer or client, you might have some regulated users that you're going to maintain everyone on premise, and then non-regulated users, people who are in the back office who don't really care about them, we're going to move those users to the cloud. Or maybe it's functional areas that they're moving. So that's something that, we see in the marketplace quite a bit. The other thing is, obviously, Salesforce.com and those types of ERP applications have been cloud-based for a number of years, right? So they have been out there. But now, obviously, this group here, you're saying email, collaboration, whether it's SharePoint Online or Yammer, those are all cloud-based technologies. And how do you get your arms around that data? How can we serve that information back up to the organization internally? And obviously, I mentioned talent applications are moving to the cloud. That's what we see in our environment. And I mentioned this before is UC, Skype for Business. And the big thing is around that I personally see is federation. If I'm an insurance company, I'm the Hartford, I want to communicate with some third-party organizations. How do I manage that content? How do I ensure that, if Don is going to share a file via Skype for Business Online, that file doesn't have any proprietary data or it doesn't have any sensitive data and it leaks out. A few years ago, there was an instance with NetApp. You guys are familiar with NetApp, right? So one of the senior product managers hosted the roadmap, confidential roadmap, to a public SharePoint site that all their partners had access to, right? So 24 hours go by, 2 days go by, 3 days, and they finally realize, wait a second, they uploaded this file to the wrong SharePoint site. So obviously they pulled it down. So those are some of the things that are really driving the need for some of the compliance, even if it's not an e-discovery litigation matter. So a question I have for the group is, how many of you have Office 365 with email Exchange Online? Okay, that same group, how many have Skype for Business on-premise? Okay, so majority have Skype, so Exchange Online and Skype Online. Is that fair? Okay.
We use our own phone system.
Everything, I'm sorry?
We use our own on-prem phone system. We don't use Skype.
Okay, you don't use Skype. Okay. What about SharePoint on-premise versus SharePoint online? Where are you at in that kind of migration?
Online.
Online?
I do on-prem.
On-prem? Okay. And, what's that?
We want to move online.
You want to move online? Yeah. And the reason you haven't yet is based on other priorities, or maybe legal getting their arms around moving that content store online?
Yeah, it's all of that, but it's certainly not our pipeline.
Yep. And I'm sure you probably have different versions of SharePoint, right? SharePoint 2003, 2007. Some of those have different APIs and abilities around archiving. So, this is what we're seeing in the market. So this is kind of validating, what we see as well. And, what I didn't put here, and I was talking with Mike earlier, is, and something I'm pretty excited about, is the whole acquisition with LinkedIn. And really what that's going to open up as far as information to people like myself and collaboration capabilities, right? And how we can leverage that internally to drive our business. So information governance at a high level, kind of changing the landscape here. This has been in the marketplace for a long time. At the end of the day, what this is talking about is involving IT, legal, security, the corporate and governance team to put a wrapper around all their data. Right? Legal comes and says, here, Don, here's a file plan for all our documents. Finance, we're keeping it for 7 years. Sales, we're going to keep your data for a year, right? Engineering, we're going to keep it for 7. So what this whole process is about is looking at the value proposition of the data and having policies to govern it. So you create information, you're using it, you hold it for whatever reason it might be. If there's a litigation request, maybe it's an employee dispute, right? We see this quite a bit in our business where especially in the technology field, employees leave the organization and they come back and they have a small claim against the organization. I was wrongfully terminated, or I didn't get the promotion that I wanted. One of the cases that I was working on here locally is at Boston Medical. One of the senior practitioners was let go in the organization, so she turned around and sued the hospital, claiming discrimination. Right? Next you know, it goes from state court to federal court. Before you know it, the IT guys are scrambling, trying to grab all the SharePoint data, all the data, unstructured data, and manage it. So having this this process put in place really enables organizations to serve up the organization and kind of what's driving it, right? This is just some snapshots, but every day you can turn on the news and we'll see what happens with the political climate, moving forward here. But at the end of the day, no organization wants their name in the paper, right? And what's driving this is the regulations, whether you're in financial services, you're in healthcare or pharmaceutical, they're getting more teeth. Previous years, these organizations would just slap, they would have a sanction, but they never really implement that sanction. So Scottrade recently was fined $2.6 million over lack of these compliance policies and procedures around their data. And again, these are just some snapshots of what we see and what's really driving it. So how many of you have a record plan or some type of retention policy? Is your retention policy keep everything forever? Most of you probably, right? It's an argument. Everyone gets to, okay, we're going to have a new policy. We're going to delete it. And no one deletes it, right? You keep it. Maybe?
No, I was just confirming. We have things for years. Yeah, almost never.
Yeah, you try to get rid of it, and you can't delete that, right? So when I worked for EMC a number of years ago, we were rolling out our own email archiving system, right? We're a big exchange client. We had 125 terabytes of PST files. They went out to everyone's laptop, all the employees, and said, no more PST files. We collected all the PST files, right? So what do you start doing as a user? Sales guy, right? You're out in the field. I need my data. You start copying them, sending your Yahoo account. So then they start seeing all this network traffic go back and forth. They're like, put the brakes on. So in any case, every organization has some level of, record-keeping requirement, whether you're a financial services organization and you're required to do that for all your users, for your regulated users, you're a healthcare provider, and there's a number of different acts. It started off, if you think about Sarbanes-Oxley and some of the challenges there. The biggest thing that we've seen in the compliance area, and I'm sure Don would attest to this, is that when Sarbanes-Oxley came out, the biggest challenge is now the CFO was liable, right, for signing the financial statements, saying, Todd Heythaler, I audited this statement, everything's fine. Now the compliance organization, the chief compliance officer, could be liable based on these new regulations that came out for missing information, for not storing information correctly. So now compliance is really stepping up in these organizations and really having a much larger seat at the table. Equal Pay Act, I think there's been a lot of, if you think about the Walmart, hopefully no one works here at Walmart because obviously Walmart had a lot of issues over labor rates. In general, there's a number of different regulatory bodies, from FINRA to the FDA. MiFID II is a really challenging one for financial service organizations. How many of you have an online trading account? E-Trade, whatever it might be. MiFID II is really going to impact that, where now the dealers and the brokers and the traders, right, they got to maintain all this information, from voice calls to video calls, all the trading information. So you've got structured data, unstructured data, and you got to manage it. So it's really creating a lot of challenges for all organizations. And the thing we find is it's about the content and context of the communication. That's really what it comes down to. So the information governance requirements, we kind of broke this up into 4 different verticals, and if you're not from one of these verticals, we can also kind of talk about that as well, how it might be impacting you, from financial services to pharmaceutical, healthcare, and energy. Obviously, the easiest one is financial services. The FINRA is really creating a culture of compliance, and we've seen a lot of recent fines and penalties, sanctions really, in the industry, and FINRA is really stepping up, specifically around cybersecurity. And this is where you start to see some of the DLP capability in Office 365 really start to evolve a little bit more. And when you look at some of the specific applications that are required within FINRA, supervision is one of those. So if you think of Fidelity, right? So any of their regulated users, if they're trading activities, I got to supervise what's going on. So if Don is a trader for my company, right? I have to read his emails, or I have to sample his emails. And not just his emails, I got to sample all of his Skype for Business conversations, all of his messages. Or if he uses Bloomberg or Reuters or some other communication protocol, I got to monitor that. And this is some additional documentation from FINRA. Any financial service organizations here today? No? One in the back? Okay. Are you familiar with FINRA or some of the regs there? Okay. So at least this is relevant for some of the folks here. Additional SEC and FINRA regulations, these are just a sampling of some of the fines. And again, I think the biggest thing that Don and I have seen over the years is the fines are getting much more stiffer. I think the consumers today are getting fed up with, what happened in 2008, quite honestly, and that's really kind of impacting what's happening in the organization. You guys say something?
Yeah, the latest one is Wells Fargo, of course, where the CEO has to resign and millions in sanctions, and even look to Volvo, where they falsified reports, and EPA is basically fining them billions of dollars, in essence, because they were acting the way that was completely opposed to what they should be. So that's really what it comes down to.
How many of your organizations are using social media today? Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Right? So this is the area that we see specifically in financial services for the folks in the back as well is, Don is trying, so let's say Don is a mortgage broker, financial advisor. He's trying to find out who Todd's connected to on LinkedIn so he can use my network to go sell additional mortgages or loans, right? So there's specific rules and regulations that govern how I interact on these networks. If you're a pharmaceutical company, right, the sales individuals can't go out there and use Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter and post stuff about the drugs that they're promoting or selling, right? It's got to be structured content that's approved by the governance for it, right? What's acceptable in the marketplace? And these are just some of the additional fines that are hitting organizations today. And I won't get into all the details on the different SEC and FINRA regs, but just note that in financial services, there's a lot of pain here right now in forcing organizations to really ensure they have a corporate governance strategy, because the last thing we want to do in IT is stop the business from using some new protocol. Is anyone using Slack today? I know that's outside the conversation here today, but if you think about Microsoft's strategy, the acquisition with Yammer, I think, was really interesting, right? The acquisition of LinkedIn, because organizations today are relying on more than email to communicate internally. And then if you look at the power of Office 365 with SharePoint Online, now if I'm a healthcare provider, maybe I want to open up a SharePoint portal to third parties so that they can actually access some of my content. Well, how can I control that information? Office 365 and SharePoint, there's some embedded capabilities, but what we find is a lot of those capabilities may not be, we'll call it enterprise ready or enough for an enterprise organization, meaning it's not a granular policy that I can set down to the individual or the folder level. Any questions on that? Okay. So healthcare, any healthcare folks in the room? Couple? Okay, one, yeah. So obviously, everyone's, HIPAA a number of years ago was everywhere, right? It's going to be the downfall to the healthcare organizations. And my wife still gets upset every time we go to the doctor, right? The nurse won't talk to my wife. Right? It's got to be Todd. This is your information. Only you can look at this, right? So again, this is really impacting the way that we're interacting with our care providers, whether it's a payor or payee system. But again, a number of different breaches in the marketplace impacting the healthcare system. And this is probably one of the biggest areas that we'll continue to see over the next 3 to 5 years. The biggest change in this area, specifically with Microsoft, we see a lot of healthcare providers moving to Office 365, right? It lowers their overall operational costs, and now it's empowering the doctors and physicians to really provide better treatment to their users because of the digital approach. Don, were you going to mention anything there?
Yeah, and to take that a step further, it's also consistent within the healthcare industry, the whole movement towards e-health. So not just electronic records, but also the provision of healthcare over the web. So getting advice from other hospitals, even sharing information within the community, like you say, federated, access to content. It's very much in keeping with the overall movement to reduce the infrastructure and focus on the practice of medical care and move to the cloud, whatever is not considered mission critical.
Yeah. And obviously, the impact of security breaches. And again, looking at the DLP capability that is in Office 365, it's kind of evaluating within your own organization. Do these features provide us enough capability and feature sets? Looking at a matrix, yes or no, and kind of saying, all right, maybe there's other tools or other solutions out there that could provide us some additional capability. And, where we were working with MetLife specifically was on SharePoint Yammer. So SharePoint on-premise, SharePoint Online, and Yammer, they really wanted to have a more advanced DLP capability, where they have a policy that inspects content that's being posted to the SharePoint site. So, having a policy to scan through that, looking for keywords, key phrases, but then also alerting someone that, hey, Don sent some file, Don had some action that may be inappropriate, he said something, a derogatory statement against an employee. So we can capture that, monitor that ahead of time. And that's what the MetLife story. And really, in that case, we helped Microsoft really further the adoption. Some studies that we have, with Microsoft is that, and I'd love to hear the guys who run the group here, less than 20% of all the Office 365 available licenses have been deployed. So I've heard numbers. I met with CSC last week. They have numbers like 7%, which I think is really low. But looking at all the folks that have an Office 365 ability license, they haven't deployed it yet because they're trying to figure out, hey, I got the data on premise. What do I do with it? I got to have some type of retention policy. My users want access to it. How do we do it? So, in the pharmaceutical life sciences, the FDA, PPSA, again, just some additional specific regulations. This is interesting because this is more focused around social media, maybe not necessarily focused on Office 365 solutions, but the same is true since obviously Microsoft owns LinkedIn now, but looking at AstraZeneca, where they were using Twitter and having a Twitter campaign, and the bottom line is the company's drug without providing safety information. So if you're taking this medicine, I can't just randomly start sending these messages out there without having some type of content store that's actually going to authorize the content for me to send. Any folks from energy? Yeah. So, what's that?
I have clients in energy.
You do, yeah. Yeah, the biggest one we find here is obviously, they're specifically for the broker-dealer, the commodity traders on the energy desk is, they're using Office 365 and they need to monitor and track their messages. So, kind of in summary, before we get into the Office 365 stack, so what we try to highlight is, some of the pain and challenges for, enforcing information governance. I'm looking at, what we're seeing in the marketplace from a trends perspective, and then, looking at effective data management across the different silos. So from rolling out Exchange Online, having a specific policy there, from rolling out Skype Online, maybe we're going to have Skype. I think we had a couple folks that the Skype servers are on premise, or maybe they're still using Link, some version of Link, right? We're dealing with Pfizer, and they're still using OCS, believe it or not, right? Hasn't broken. I know it's end of life, end of support, but it's working. So, but having a data management plan across the Office 365 stack, and then a quick response to discovery events. So we talked about NetApp and this gentleman who posted this file to the SharePoint site, having the ability to be alerted and monitoring those sites. And then availability of data reuse within the enterprise. I think there's been a number of studies about, and I think SharePoint's doing a good job of, enhancing their feature sets to the end user, making it easier. We actually use it, we use Office 365 internally, but we have a big SharePoint site with OneDrives as well. And then risk management and control, right? So I'm deploying all these new collaboration capabilities. How do I enforce risk management across that, from a security, from a DLP perspective? And then the last thing for those regulated customers, having compliance and regulatory oversight.
Yeah, before we leave there, just the hidden future looking movement piece is the whole idea of data reuse. So everyone, again, there's a big push with analytics, right? Because we have all this data that's being captured, it's been captured for a long time. The idea is now the organizations want to derive value out of it. They have a lot of experience in working within the structured data realm. ERP goes back 15 years. It's pretty well known. If everyone knows Cognos, those guys very well. The whole idea is they're able to derive information out of structured data sets. Well, as you look to move forward and kind of moving within the Office 365 realm and move to the cloud, they want to derive the same level of value out of data they consider their own. But then how do you do that, right? How do you derive value out of something that isn't necessarily on-premise, in your control, right? Is that an area of opportunity? When you look at organizations like IBM, for example, and Watson and what they're trying to do in that space, all they're doing every day is trying to derive value out of unstructured data sets that are already maintained within the organization. So what does that mean for the organization through the Office 365? How we will do that?
Yep. So Office 365, what does it offer? Are there limitations, right? So obviously, I believe most folks are probably familiar with the different, bundled offerings, E1, E3, E5. I'll just build this slide out here, right? But we want to highlight on a couple things. So, every organization needs to sit down with their legal and compliance team to determine what really their core requirements are for the organization, right? So the E1 license, obviously, right, e-discovery basic search, so having the ability to go search, a mailbox looking for Don Ryan's information and putting on a legal hold, right? As you move down the stack and with E3, obviously there's additional capability in bundling. Microsoft has done a great job, from my perspective, great job at bundling and marketing their solutions this way, right? But when you come down here, obviously you've got the Unified Discovery Center, advanced mail and archiving with legal hold, right? So there's certain capabilities, and then we move to the far right-hand side, right? We took out the pricing. Obviously, it's posted online. You have your Microsoft team, but it's per user per month. So what we do is we sit down with organizations, look at their core requirements, what Microsoft bundle they have, and figure out, are there areas that we can help supplement their environment. And on the E5 side, right, placing e-discovery holds and the advanced security in ATP and lookbox or lockbox. I'm sorry. So looking at these core areas, there's areas for augmentation and supplement. So to give you an example, so with Office 365, what we're hearing from customers is that, if I'm doing a search across my Exchange server, right, 20 mailboxes, and this is just an example, 60 keywords across 4 content sources, how do I put a legal hold on that? So if you're not familiar with a legal hold, it's ending retention, right? So there's some event that happened, right? Someone's asking me for data. It's a subpoena against the organization. It may not be a class action lawsuit, right? Someone's asking for information. I got to go lock it down so that my legal team can look at it and figure out, is it even relevant to this, right? That's a standard policy or process for most organizations. So on the right-hand side, when you've got kind of the Office 365 search screens, right? You're doing a search anywhere, a custom location search. And this is the one thing that we're hearing from customers is, when we look at side by side, yeah, Office 365 is a great repository. There's some retention management. There is some searching capability. But if legal needs the ability to do a granular search for Don's email and only export or put on legal hold certain messages or certain conversations, that's where the solution starts to break down a little bit. And there's a number of tools out in the marketplace that helps organizations manage and meet those needs. Don, anything you want to say on that?
No, in general, there's two things, right? So it's not just when you're asking a question, right? So we ask a lot of questions. When you think about communication internally within an organization, is the only way that you communicate through email and IM? And the answer, quite honestly, is no, right? There's, Skype for Business, obviously, that's what we're talking about. But think about, Yammer, think about, Salesforce Chatter, think about LinkedIn, Facebook, all the different chat capability out there that might be managed as an enterprise application. Then all of a sudden, you're not just looking at content within Office 365, it's content within your ecosystem. So again, in some scenarios, the native tools within Office 365 may be perfectly done, right? But that's a conversation I think that you want to have with your legal team.
And one, I cover the Canadian market as well, and one of the things we're finding in the Canadian market is obviously their rules and regulations are slightly different, but they're taking a different approach on compliance. They're looking at compliance for social content, right? So specifically, the social aspects of SharePoint Online, the wikis, the blogs, right? And those things live for a long time, right? So if you think about, this board here, if I write on this board, right? So, let's say I come in here, I make a post on January 1st, I come back in, I make a statement on, right, March 15th, I come back in June, right? The wikis and blogs, they're dynamic, they're living, right? If I send you a Skype for Business message, or a Skype message, one-to-one traffic, right? Maybe I have a group message, but what's interesting about Enterprise Social and SharePoint and Yammer is, boy, if I'm only, grabbing this conversation thread, what was said in March 15th, I don't know what was said here. I don't know what was said here. So one of the organizations we work with is Rolls-Royce. And Rolls-Royce has specific DoD requirements where if they're communicating with a non-US employee, they need to be able to log and archive those messages. So they just rolled out SharePoint. They're in the steering committee room and they're going through the project plan, and legal says, whoa, wait a second. We can't log and archive the information, the traffic that's going back and forth. So they basically put a stop to the project, right? The CIO got involved, who's actually based overseas, and they started looking at different tools, and they came back in and said, well, we need a compliance solution that's going to allow us to capture those threads and preserve them in context. So if you think about whiteboards, and you come in and it's a living, breathing organism, or your Facebook, your own personal Facebook page, right? Tracking each one of those messages is very difficult in context. And it was a challenge for Rolls-Royce specifically. Right? So Microsoft Office 365, so on the left-hand side, there's a number of things that, obviously they do really well. The compliance center functionality has been improving over the last few years. A lot of it is because their customers are saying, if you want us to adopt Office 365, we need better tools, right? We need better DLP capability, better searching capability, et cetera, right? There's new functionality on the preservation and discovery. And some of it's changed from Exchange 2010 to Exchange 2013, right? Where now the PST file is being managed a little bit differently. They're working toward, and I think they have this now for 1784 compliance. So that's basically ensuring that when you're retaining the data, it's stored and you can't modify or delete that content, right? WORMS content storage. And then also some of the things that they've really added recently is the archive hold for Exchange, SharePoint, Link, Skype for Business in OneDrive. When we talk about OneDrive, we typically group SharePoint and OneDrive together. I don't know if you guys, in your user group, if you're kind of focused that way as well. And then having a unified search. So Microsoft is getting a lot better in this area, but we're still seeing some areas that, some of the industry analysts like Forrester, right? So depending on the organization, it's a good fit, but if you're heavily litigated, it may not be the right fit for you. You may need some additional tool sets. Their federated search and e-discovery needs some work. The other thing is non-Microsoft content, right? So I'm sure your organization doesn't only drive on Microsoft content. There's other forms of content out there. So, there's some interesting things that are going on in the marketplace. We're actually working with Microsoft now to take non-Microsoft content. So let's think about Cisco Jabber. Hate to say that here in the Microsoft building, but let's say you acquire a company and they're running Jabber. Now you want to take that Jabber information and move it into Office 365. How do you do that, right? So we're working with Microsoft to come up with those processes to do that. And then for specific requirements around supervision for the folks that work in financial services, having a supervisory application as well is something that they just haven't focused on. So again, looking at your requirements, Office 365 out of the box and the new features might be the solution for you. But then, you might want to consider if you are heavily litigated, have a strong information governance practice internally. I'll give you an example. We had a client, they were fined roughly about $53 million a couple years ago. And through that, right, the CEO basically in the board mandated a very strong look at information governance. So they started putting new tools and processes in place across the board. And, for them, they're moving to Office 365. The first part was security and privacy. My data's in the cloud. They got legal over that hurdle. And now they're looking at compliance and legal as far as searching and collecting the content. And they've come back to us to partner with us as they roll out Office 365. So the good, right, for Office 365 archiving. So for Office 365 Exchange Mail, is it, 3-year, 5-year retention most folks are using in today's world? Something like that?
Well, 7.
Yours is 7? Okay. So we hear 3, at first Microsoft wasn't offering this, right? They weren't going to have anything older than, 12-month retention. And then their customers really demanded that they offer this tool. Again, the good, allowing users to search their own content. Again, most folks use Outlook or some type of web interface to it. Actually use Skype for Business on phone. It works pretty well. I don't know if you guys are using the same thing. Unified experience across these different systems. And then the retention. This is getting much more enterprise ready, I guess is what I would call it in the organization. And then it's a native and familiar user experience. We have a lot of clients that are moving from IBM Domino mail servers over to Office 365. And some of the challenges, quite honestly, is they focus really strongly here, but we have, again, some e-discovery or regulatory requirements for case management and litigation holds. Again, not just putting Don Ryan's, your laptop, everything on hold, but I want to put a specific date range or specific content within Don's structure on hold, right? It's very challenging to do that. Searching across the organization is also difficult. And then the context preservation. So if you think of a Skype for Business message, right, or you're sending a text message back and forth to someone, right? If I just pull my own messages, I mean, each one of these is stored as a separate object in the archive. That's very difficult to manage if you're an e-discovery person, or if you're a compliance officer, or you're an HR manager, right? If I got to look through 20 or 30 different posts that Don made, and I'm an HR manager, I need to monitor. How do I do that? Right? It's very difficult. So that's where this comes in, right? The challenge is the context preservation. I want to know what was said, when it was said, and if Don went and deleted anything, right, between those times when I posted something. And then also having the cloud content store. We are working with Avanade. I don't know if anyone's considered, a private cloud like Avanade. We have some organizations, PNC Bank actually is one of the clients that we work with. They have outsourced their entire, another client that went from IBM Domino Mail and same time chat over to Office 3. It's not Office 365 because it's private cloud, but to the Exchange family and SharePoint. So Avanade has been hosting that environment as well. So, right. So I'm going to build this slide out. I think I got like 3 or 4 minutes left here. But you know, when you kind of think about e-discovery and compliance, which is where Don and I come from, right? Is the organization has the need to go out and capture a number of different streams, right? Whether it's Skype for business message or it's email or it's SharePoint online, right? I need the ability to go out and search it and retain that information and preserve it so it can't be modified, deleted, or altered, right? And then also I need the ability to review that content. So if I'm in financial services or in some other regulated markets like pharmaceutical, you know, they may have the need to do surveillance on that content. So what was transpiring at a given time. And this is something I think we're going to see as the analytics from Microsoft continue to come out. You're going to see some additional capability here where, you know, now we're being much more proactive. It's not this big brother, but, you know, looking at like user sentiment, like what's going on in the marketplace. One of the clients we've been working with is Lowe's. So obviously everyone knows Lowe's, right? They compete against Home Depot. And one of the things they want to do is, so they have an end case, right? Those end cases, when you walk into Lowe's, that's where their money's spent. So what they want is real-time analytics. They use Office 365, where if you come in and one store has a blowout on, let's say it's paintbrushes, maybe it's the design that they had. They want to take that, basically pump it out to all the other 3,000 stores within North America so that they can drive their additional sales. And they're doing that through SharePoint and Yammer. So it's really interesting how they're trying to drive it. But for them, the content surveillance is a little different use case. And on the right-hand side, the Discover side, right? Having the ability to support legal or compliance or some other use case that you might have. Don, anything on this side? Because I think we got 1 or 2 slides left.
No, I think we're good.
All right. So just some questions that we'll leave with you guys. Again, we appreciate coming in. You know, more from a technical side, but you know, do you need compliant capture across your communication channels, right? So as you're rolling out Office 365, or if you've rolled it out, you know, now legal's coming in saying, hey, how do we search it? How do we find this? How do we put it on hold, right? The conversation around compliant capture comes up quite a bit. You know, do you need storage that, you know, Don can't go out and delete, right? Worm storage. And then also the ability to have unlimited legal holds where, you know, if I have 5 legal matters this year, I need to have 5 separate legal holds. It's very challenging to do that right now on the Office 365 solution. You know, do you need unlimited ability to manage matters? So what this is, you know, most organizations that we support, they have anywhere from 100 to 200 legal matters a year. Now that could be a slip and fall. It could be an HR employment matter. It could be a subpoena for third-party information. You know, and do you need, you know, a service level back search performance? You know, what type of search performance are you looking for? You got to search the enterprise looking for specific content. If you're financial services or in life sciences, you know, do you have any type of supervisory review where you're monitoring what your employees are doing, the communication threads, and doing sampling across that, right? And then lastly, you know, do your legal teams or compliance teams want to serve themselves, right? You know, your role in IT isn't to, you know, this is the biggest argument that Don and I hear. It's Friday, 5 o'clock. IT gets to call, hey, I need Don's data. I need it now. You know, can you work on it? Can you come in on Saturday or Sunday? One of the accounts we're working with now, downtown Boston, you know, the IT guys are like, we're coming on Saturdays and Sundays trying to discover this content and present it back. Like they want to give the power to the end users with their appropriate security controls and admin rights. So again, when you're looking at Office 365 and you're sitting down with legal or compliance, you know, these are some of the things that, you know, we typically ask organizations, and we start mapping out, you know, is Office 365 what they provide out of the box? Is that enough? It might be, right? Or are there ways that we can supplement that environment?
I would take it a step further. I would think in the last 3 or 4 years, Office 365 and Microsoft in general have done a lot to try to invest in building value through the bundles that they have, specifically on archiving and governance.
And some of that's through the acquisitions they've made. So, Equivio is the big one that everyone points to. The real question when it comes to information governance and call it compliance within, your sphere is, what are the requirements coming at you? Like, what do you need to respond to in general? Is it going to be enough to fall back on the tool sets that are already available to you in Office 365? Now, that's the question you want to ask. And then, the counterpoint to that is go back to the people are asking the question. So typically it's legal or some kind of compliance folks to find out what it is they need. And if what they need is provided through the tools that are available today, great, you've got yourself covered. And if you're working as an organization to restrict the number of avenues that your folks have to communicate, which reduces your overall risk, then that's a good approach. But if the organization is pushing you to adopt new channels or new ways to communicate, then that's when you want to start looking at ways to expand your solution set that may not always just involve Office 365. But in general, what we've witnessed is Microsoft continues to invest in the space, and they've come a long way in providing what we consider to be almost enterprise-ready application support for this level of usability.
Yeah.
Any questions?
So a lot of the e-discovery tools with 365 today are based on the search engine.
Yeah.
There's a lot of areas that the search engine doesn't touch.
Yeah.
So whether it's your Sway, whether it's your 365 video or stream, whether it's your Yammer conversations, have you seen any solutions in the market that can kind of give you that full end-to-end or at least fill those gaps?
You want to take it?
Yes. There are quite a few. I mean, I'll speak for Atkins, what we do. So we have a very tight partnership with Microsoft, and that's how they use us today. They use us to fill the gaps between, what it is they handle in terms of day-to-day run-rate activity and what organizations are needing beyond that. So use Skype for Business, a perfect example, where if you're just using Skype for Business and not using things like attachments or video, then you can just fall back on the tools that are available today for Office 365. The challenge is as soon as you start looking to attachments, that's not coming, and that's a big gap. So that's where we step in. We had a client that actually tried to move down the native tool path, and eventually came back to us because they realized that it wasn't going to satisfy the obligations that they had. So yes, but beyond ourselves, like there are other organizations who help capture that information. The difference between what we do and what other folks do is we're also cloud-based. We're actively developing with Microsoft and with what they're trying to do in this space.
Yeah, one of the things that we've developed with Microsoft is the ability to I mentioned this earlier, but non-Microsoft content, right? So whether it's same time from IBM or maybe it's an enterprise social application like Jive, right, which competes against SharePoint or something like that, where now we can take that content, non-Microsoft content, and ingest it into Office 365. So Microsoft it's interesting, in the Canadian market, we have some really interesting projects that are going on. Microsoft built these 2 major data centers in Canada. They just opened them up, and a lot of, because it's financial services typically in energy, right? They're trying to figure out, hey, how do we roll out Office 365? So the Microsoft sales team, specifically the Skype teams, are working with us. We've done some joint presentations with the CTO for the UC group, the Skype for Business group itself. I think it's online too. We can even send some links that the CTO did with us. So it's interesting, and again, that to me is probably the biggest area for growth and challenges is, everyone's using Skype, right? And now you want to federate. How do you control that, right? And what features do you want to control? And we do a lot within like ethical walls, right? So if you're a financial services company and you have your traders, you may not want them to communicate with someone else, right? One of the things that we did for a hospital is that they wanted, so when the doctors are in the emergency room, they're operating, they want the ability to reach out to these specialists that are outside their hospital for instant expertise. So what they did is they set up a bi-directional capability. So if you think of like an ethical wall where Don and I can't communicate on Skype, right? Bi-directional is I can reach out to Don, right, with this policy, and then Don can respond back to me, right? That's one example. Or the other example is you got a CEO, right? Don shouldn't reach out to the CEO because we don't want that, but the CEO can reach out to him. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're doing in the policy side of it, especially when you have different platforms of communication. We see it a lot in M&A activity where someone just acquired a company, they have a different platform, a different network, and they want to allow those users to communicate. And obviously you can set up federation today in these tools, but it's having the granular policies.
Any other questions? No.
I'd be interested to know how many people are using like just the email archiving piece of 365 and how you find it. Limitations, issues. We're not using it yet, we're going to it. So like, should we? Should we flip the switch and say, let's turn it on? Are we going to run into any issues? You know. But here, using that only, how do you find it?
Beats the heck out of PSTs. It's, I mean, I like it. It gives you the ability to have the archive available to any device. Or over PS. A lot of the third-party solutions that I've seen don't always work with all the other devices. So that tends to be problematic.
You know,
But
you have archiving policies in place, retention policies, I mean. You prevent them from creating PSTs.
So preventing the PSD, that can be done through GPS.
But that's only people on a domain. They're on a device.
Or a non-domain device, then it gets a lot more complicated. Do you guys have any answers to that one?
No.
Using native archiving now. Yeah, that's.
They have yet to extend policies through Azure Join. Right now on Windows 10, you can actually join directly to Azure. As soon as you do that, it says applying your company's policies to this machine, which is kind of nice, except that there are very, very few policies that are actually. So I'm hoping that they actually move forward in the direction where they offer more GPO-like options for that. And that would be a great solution for EYAD people, for people that don't have an active directory at all.
The other option too is if you use like mobile device management solutions, you can enforce policies on the machine like MDMs, or even if you go classic, some of the VPN clients through Checkpoint or Cisco or even the Kathy antivirus, you can go and you can enforce policies that get overridden and locked to the local security policy of the machine. So you might be able to get creative with it, but I'd probably check like Windows or Azure Intune and run VM stack as the first step.
Well, again, we appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk to you a little bit about, what we see in the marketplace and some of the compliance and legal. So, if you're, working with your internal teams and there's questions about compliance or legal and, how do we manage the content, how do we store it, think of Actians and, we'd love to have conversations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to go back to your presentation?
Yeah, let's go back over. Without causing heartache to the poor machine. Poor Windows.
Did your pizza really come from a Domino's store?
We on hold? We're still going. We're still going. Awesome. Sweet. Again, thank you, Actians, for sponsorship, for the food, for the grub, for speaking. We can't do this without generous sponsors like you guys, so thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, there's your title slide. Okay, now we're done. Cool. So there's a upcoming events. So there are a lot of other user groups around. We have, if you're into the SharePoint focus, we have the Boston area SharePoint user group. They dabble in the Office 365 space as well, but their core is SharePoint. There's one up in New Hampshire. If you're further north from here, there's one in Rhode Island if you want to go down there. There's one in Connecticut that a good friend of mine runs. I highly recommend that one. Not as yeah, it actually runs the same night as us, so you better not go to that one. But if you had a good reason to not be here, you can go to his. There is an Azure user group, a link user group, or Skype user group, which with a link URL, and then SPS events. If you don't know what SPS events are, it's SharePoint Saturdays. They're 8-hour events, free, usually hosted at Microsoft location like this one, where there are multiple tracks, multiple sessions, multiple fantastic speakers and content. And again, it's free. It's a great place to learn a lot more about SharePoint, Office 365, and to network. Anybody know of any other community events around town? Or we don't have a slide for this. February 1st, Microsoft's Beyond event is coming. And I don't know what it's beyond, but it's beyond something, and it's going to be in this building, and it's an all-day thing on the 1st, February 1st. If you're interested in that, I can send you the link that I used to register. But it's a bunch of IT Pro stuff. All the speakers are Microsoft speakers.
You'll be there?
I will be there, not speaking. No, God, no. Funny, there's a Northeast event flash up here as well. Microsoft left for us. There's cloud events coming up February 3rd and 9th. Hybrid cloud management mid-February. You guys can look at this sheet. There's URLs for all these events. Security. One Microsoft, the Beyond US Roadshow up here February 1st. So you guys can take a look at the sheet if you're interested. We will have an event next month. We don't have a speaker yet. So if any of you want to dabble, try it out, give it a whirl. It's really not that hard. Use cases, experience, pain points. You could even do, like if you went through a vendor selection process, bake-offs, things like that. Whatever it is Office 365 centric. We would even consider if you did a lot of heavy Azure stuff and with Office 365, right? Anything that kind of goes with the Microsoft Cloud stack, mostly on the Office 365 space.
Does anybody have any ideas for topics, components of Office 365? People recently, long, do it all the time. I'm currently trying to wrap my head around Teams. So. But I think Microsoft's currently trying to wrap it.
Dave Feldman is in the Connecticut Youth Group right now talking Microsoft Teams.
Oh, really?
So maybe we can pull him up next month.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. MVP. He has his quota.
Teams is a persistent chat.
Yeah, Teams is like Slack, but better.
It's persistent chat. It's very Slack-like, but it's also got embedded video and voice, but it's also got its own data repository, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated hodgepodge of everything. But
Yeah.
Let's see if we get there.
Yeah.
He works on the street.
Yeah, he does. He does. He's local. Sweet. We will see about getting him in for February.
So you don't have this room reserved yet?
I have a room reserved. I don't know which one though. But we will probably be in Burlington unless we're lucky enough to find a place in Boston, Cambridge. We do want to try to alternate locations between Burlington and Boston because I love seeing all of your faces here, but some of you only come because it's Burlington, which is great. But we have a crowd of people who only come because it's Boston that aren't here today. So we need to figure that out as a group, how to balance that more effectively. How many of you are from the Boston area or worked in Boston today and had to come up? Malden? No, that doesn't count. Yeah, okay. Cool. All right, let's move on. Cool. Any other community announcements? Anyone hiring or looking for work, or like we said before, any other good events?
So we're looking to get a contractor for a few weeks to do a branding implementation of Office 365. So if you specialize in that or you know someone that might want to do it, it doesn't have to be full time. It could be at nights or weekends, but we have an upcoming meeting in the Boston area.
Nobody else? Everyone's happy where they are and they don't need more support, or? All right, that's cool. It's good because it's Office 365. We're all happy with that. All right, nobody. Okay. Cool. Some of the member benefits, if you're learning stuff, online books are a great way to do that. So we have O'Reilly discount with 40% off all prints, 50% off ebooks. MindSharp online courses, 10% off there. Again, big thanks to Actiance. Thank you. In the raffle, we're always late on getting the raffle tickets.